The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing in the massive, silent penthouse suite. It was a sound of finality. One chapter of my life was over, and another was just forced open. Across the room, framed by a window overlooking the glittering abyss of Las Vegas, stood the man who had just bought me. He wasn't even looking at me. He was just staring out at the city, a perfect silhouette of wealth and power. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and sheer resolve. He'd paid a fortune, believing he was purchasing some broken girl he could use as a weapon. He believed the story everyone had been sold, a devastated daughter selling the only thing she had left to save her family. And part of that was true. But the most important part, the part he would learn far too late, was a lie. He thought I was the pawn in his game of revenge. The truth was, his game was just a single move in mine. My life wasn't always like this. Before the hushed tones of a brothel and a cold transaction with a millionaire, my world was built on concrete, steel, and trust. My grandfather founded Vance Construction 60 years ago with a single wheelbarrow and a dream. My father turned it into a cornerstone of our city skyline, a testament to integrity. Our name actually meant something. It meant your handshake was your bond, and family was everything. I grew up on job sites, and the smell of sawdust and wet cement was as familiar to me as my own mother's perfume. I was supposed to be the third generation, the one to take our legacy into the future. The man who destroyed it all wasn't some stranger or a corporate raider. He was family. Mark wasn't blood, but he might as well have been. He was my father's best friend since they were kids, the man I called Uncle Mark. He was there for every birthday, every holiday. He taught me how to ride a bike, and he held my father's hand at my grandfather's funeral. As our chief financial officer, he was the keeper of our secrets, the guardian of our finances. We trusted him completely, and that was our fatal mistake. The betrayal was a masterpiece of slow, creeping poison. It wasn't one big act, but 1,000 tiny cuts. For years, Mark had been bleeding our company dry, using a sophisticated network of shell corporations and fake invoices. He created a financial parasite he called the skimmer and used it to siphon off millions. He cooked the books so perfectly that every quarterly report looked better than the last. We were celebrating record profits while he was quietly bankrupting us from the inside. My brother, David, was the key to his final move. David was always the softer one, more interested in art and philosophy than rebar and profit margins. He loved our family, but he hated the business. Mark saw that weakness and exploited it with surgical precision. He fed David a steady diet of lies, convincing him that our father was running the company into the ground with reckless, old-fashioned decisions. He painted a picture of a sinking ship and offered David a lifeboat. All David had to do was sign a few documents to authorize a restructuring. It would supposedly save the company by bringing in a new silent partner. That silent partner was a holding company owned entirely by Mark. The papers David signed weren't for a restructuring, they were for a hostile takeover. Overnight, Vance Construction wasn't ours anymore. Mark, our Uncle Mark, now owned everything. Our assets, our contracts, our name. He had stolen our entire history and our future. The news shattered my father. I found him in his study, slumped over the desk, clutching his chest. A massive heart attack. The man who had been a pillar of strength my entire life was suddenly fragile, hooked up to a web of tubes and monitors in an ICU. The doctors said the stress was the trigger. Mark hadn't just stolen our company, he had nearly murdered our father. While Dad fought for his life, the rest of our world crumbled. The bank accounts were frozen, creditors swarmed. We were evicted from the home my grandfather had built. My mother, a woman of quiet grace, seemed to age a decade in a week. David was a ghost, hollowed out with guilt. He finally confessed what he'd done, tears streaming down his face as he explained how Mark had manipulated him. I wanted to scream at him for his stupidity, but I couldn't. Looking at his broken form, I just saw another one of Mark's victims. We were left with nothing but a mountain of my father's medical bills and the crushing weight of shame. Mark, meanwhile, was being celebrated. He gave interviews to business journals, spinning this tale about how he had valiantly stepped in to save a failing company from its aging founder. He was the hero. We were the failures. Every time I saw his smug face on a magazine cover, a cold, hard knot of rage tightened in my stomach. It wasn't just about the money. He tried to erase us. He had stolen our name and tarnished our honor. And I knew, with a certainty that burned hotter than any grief, that I would not let him get away with it. I would get it all back. I would destroy him. But to do that, I needed power and resources, and I had nothing. Nothing except for one last, desperate and terrible idea. The fluorescent lights of the free clinic flickered, casting a sickly glow on the peeling paint and the exhausted faces around me. This was my new reality. Days were a bureaucratic maze of social assistance programs, trying to cover Dad's mounting medical costs. Nights were spent on a lumpy couch in a friend's tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling and listening to the city sirens, each one a fresh reminder of how far we had fallen. I tried to find work. I had a business degree, top of my class, but the Vance name was now poison. In our city's tight-knit construction world, everyone knew Mark's version of the story. To them, I was the daughter of a failed, reckless businessman. Doors that would have once swung wide open were now slammed in my face. I ended up waiting tables at a greasy diner, the smell of stale coffee clinging to me like a shroud. I'd come home with aching feet and just enough cash to buy groceries for the day, a joke against the Everest of debt we were facing. My father was discharged, but he was a shadow of his former self. He needed round-the-clock care, expensive meds, and physical therapy we just couldn't afford. Every morning I'd help him with his exercises, my hands trembling as I supported his frail limbs. He'd look at me with a pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with his body. It was the pain of a patriarch who couldn't provide for his family anymore, a builder whose own foundations had been shattered. He never said Mark's name, but it hung in the air between us, a toxic ghost. The final blow came as a certified letter. The insurance company was denying a crucial part of my father's continued care. The cost would now fall entirely on us, a sum so astronomical it felt like a sick joke. I sat on the floor of our tiny apartment, holding that letter, and for the first time, I truly broke. The rage that had been fueling me curdled into pure despair. We had no options left. We were going to lose him. Not to the heart attack, but to the slow, agonizing crush of poverty. That night, unable to sleep, I fell down an internet rabbit hole, searching for desperate solutions, fast money, emergency cash, unconventional fundraising. The results were a grim collection of predatory lenders and scams. And then I saw it, an article about a famous legal brothel in Nevada. It mentioned a history of high-profile auctions, women who had sold their virginity for astronomical sums to pay off debts or support their families. I read stories about women who had done it to fund their education or after a devastating betrayal. An idea, ugly and monstrous, began to form in my mind. It felt vile. It felt surrender. My body was the only asset I had left that was truly mine. The thought of selling it, of reducing myself to a commodity, was nauseating. It went against every principle I had. But then I looked over at the couch where my father was sleeping, his breath shallow and uneven. I thought of Mark, living in our house, driving our cars, basking in the glory of his theft. And the nausea was replaced by a cold, chilling clarity. This wasn't surrender. It was a weaponization. Mark had stripped me of all conventional power. Fine, I would use the unconventional. I would embrace the scandal, the shame, and the spectacle. I would turn my desperation into capital. The world saw me as a victim, a fallen heiress. I would give them a story they could never forget. The auction wouldn't just be about money. It would be a declaration of war. It would be the loudest, most shocking message I could send to the world and to Mark that I was not broken. I was not finished. This wasn't my downfall. This was the price of my rebirth. The decision was made. I opened my laptop, my fingers steady as I typed out the application to the Nevada brothel. I requested a doctor's letter to verify my claim, just as the women in the articles had done. There would be no doubt.
My story, the betrayed daughter of a ruined tycoon, would be my brand. I would sell my innocence, and with the proceeds, I would buy back my family's honor. I would buy my revenge.
The drive to Nevada was a blur of desert highways and grim determination. Arriving at the brothel felt like stepping onto another planet. It was a bizarre mix of garish pink neon and a strange, almost corporate professionalism. The owner, a real showman, saw the potential in my story immediately. The fallen socialite, the family betrayal, the quest for justice. He promoted it with a fervor that was both unsettling and incredibly effective. Within days, my face was everywhere. Tabloid sites, morning talk shows, gossip columns. I was the million-dollar virgin, the heiress's last stand. The narrative was perfect, a virtuous daughter making the ultimate sacrifice. They glossed over the cold fury in my heart and painted me as a tragic heroine. I let them. Every article, every interview was free advertising. I handled myself with a calm, almost regal detachment, speaking of my father's health and my desire to restore my family's name. I never mentioned Mark by name, but I didn't have to. The world loves a villain, and they happily cast him in the role. The whole process was surreal. As planned, a doctor in Carson City provided a certified letter, which the brothel's PR team promptly leaked to the press to silence any skeptics. The verification was a cold, clinical procedure that left me feeling detached from my own body, but it was a necessary evil. It made the product authentic. The bids started pouring in. The brothel had a system for vetting potential bidders. They had to prove a net worth of at least $10 million just to be considered. The bidders were a rogues gallery of the global elite, a brash Berlin rapper, a smooth-talking London politician, and a silent, imposing businessman from Dubai. The bidding became a public spectacle, a morbid kind of sport. The brothel set up a live, private auction, a decadent affair in a velvet-draped VIP lounge. It was a circus, and I was the main attraction. Dressed in a simple black dress, I sat on a ridiculously ornate chair on a small stage, feeling like a prize pig at a county fair. The auctioneer began the bidding at $500,000. The numbers climbed with sickening speed. 1 million, 1.2. The politician and the Dubai businessman went back and forth, their egos clearly on the line. I felt a wave of dizziness as the reality of it all crashed down on me. This was it, the moment I traded a piece of myself for a chance at retribution. Then, just as the bidding seemed to be settling near 1.8 million, a new voice cut through the room. It was quiet, but it carried an authority that silenced everyone. $2 million. All heads turned. Standing near the back, almost hidden in the shadows, was a man no one had noticed. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to suck in the light around them. He looked to be in his late 60s, with a face that was handsome but utterly devoid of warmth. He radiated old money power, a stark contrast to the flashy new money of the other bidders. He hadn't placed a single bid. He just waited, observed, and then ended the whole contest with one decisive blow. The auctioneer, stunned for a second, recovered quickly. $2 million from the gentleman in the back. Going once? Going twice? The room was silent. The politician looked furious. The businessman from Dubai just gave a slight, defeated nod. Sold, the auctioneer boomed, for $2 million to Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling? The name meant nothing to me. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at me with lust or even curiosity. He looked at me like someone looks at a newly acquired asset. A rep from the brothel intercepted him to handle the transaction. Per the terms, half the money would be wired to an account I'd set up, and the ranch would take the other half as commission. The initial deposit, $200,000, was made available to me almost immediately. $200,000. The rest would transfer upon completion of the contract.
Later that night, I was escorted to the most luxurious suite in the brothel's private wing. I was told Mr. Sterling would be with me shortly. I stood by the window, the $200,000 deposit confirmation glowing on my phone. It was more money than I had seen in months. It was the seed money, the beginning of my war chest. The fear from earlier was gone, replaced by that same cold, hard resolve. A knock on the door. It was him. Mr. Sterling entered, closing the door behind him, and my new life as a pawn in a millionaire's game officially began. Or so he thought. Mr. Sterling didn't approach me. He walked to the bar, poured a whiskey, and motioned for me to sit on the sofa opposite him. The silence was thick and unnerving. This wasn't the scene I had braced myself for. There was no pretense of seduction, no awkward small talk, just the cold, calculating gaze of a predator with his new toy. He took a slow sip. "You can relax, Ilara," he said, his voice a low hum. "This transaction is not about what you think it is. Your virginity is a symbol, and I have purchased it, but its real value to me is not in its consummation." I just stared, my mind racing. "Then what is this about?" He leaned forward, a faint, cruel smile on his lips. "This is about revenge, but not your revenge, mine." He let that sink in. "You see, the man who destroyed your family, Mark, is not just your enemy. He is an old and very dear enemy of mine." A chill went right down my spine. "You know Mark? You know him?" Sterling chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. "I created him. He was my protege decades ago. I taught him everything he knows about business, finance, hiding money where no one can find it. And like all good proteges, he eventually betrayed me. He stole a considerable amount of money and a very lucrative deal, then vanished, reinventing himself as your father's loyal friend. I've been waiting a very long time to settle that score." It was all starting to make a terrifying kind of sense. The auction, the crazy bid, his total lack of interest in me as a person. "You're a brave girl, Ilara," he continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your little media stunt was quite brilliant. You painted a target on Mark's back, made him a public villain. You did the hard work of turning public opinion against him. You made him vulnerable, and for that I thank you." He stood and began to pace like a caged tiger. "My plan is simple. I'm going to destroy Mark completely. I won't just take the company back. I'm going to obliterate his reputation, his finances, and his freedom. I have spent years gathering evidence of his crimes, the ones he committed long before he came for your family. The final piece of the puzzle is a set of encrypted ledgers he keeps, the real books that detail every dirty dollar he's ever made. The skimmer, as you might know it." He knew about the skimmer. My blood ran cold. "And how do I fit into all of this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You, my dear, are the bait," he said, turning to face me. "You are going to go to him. You'll tell him you're desperate, that the auction was a bust, that the winner humiliated you and left. You'll beg for his forgiveness. You will play the part of the broken, penitent niece. Your brother's guilt and your family's desperation will make it all believable. Mark, for all his cunning, has an enormous ego. The chance to lord his victory over you will be irresistible. He'll let you into his life, maybe even give you a menial job out of some twisted sense of pity." He paused, letting the disgusting scenario sink in. "Once you are inside, you will find those ledgers for me. My team will provide you with the technical means to get into his systems. You will be my Trojan horse." I felt sick. He wanted me to crawl back to the man who destroyed my father and beg for scraps, to live under his roof, endure his presence, all to serve this stranger's decades-old grudge. "And what happens to me and my family after I get you what you want?" I asked, my voice tight. Sterling shrugged, a gesture of supreme indifference. I'll be generous. Once Mark is dealt with and the assets are recovered, I'll see to it that your father's medical bills are paid. I might even give you a small stipend for your trouble, a finder's fee, let's call it. He smiled again. And as for Vance Construction, that will be mine. A trophy, a reminder. He saw the look on my face, the flicker of defiance, and his expression hardened. Don't misunderstand your position here, Ilara. You have no choice. I paid you $2 million. I own this contract. If you refuse, I walk away. The rest of the money won't be transferred. The media will be told the $1 million Virgin was a fraud. Your family will be left with nothing. And your father, well, his situation is precarious, isn't it? You will cooperate. You will do exactly as I say. You are a pawn in this game.
The first 24 hours after Sterling's little speech were a whirlwind of calculated obedience. His handler, a severe woman with a clipped accent, gave me a burner phone, a listening device disguised as a necklace, and a USB drive with spyware. I played the part of the scared, obedient girl perfectly. I asked the right questions, showed just the right amount of fear, and promised to do exactly as I was told. They totally bought it. They saw what they wanted to see, a desperate victim with no other options. But the moment I was alone, the real work began. First, I accessed the $200,000 from the auction deposit. That was my war chest. Second, I made a call, not with the burner phone, but with a new, untraceable one I bought with cash. I called a man my father had once praised for his discretion and unconventional problem-solving skills. His name was Kyle, a former Mossad investigator who now ran a private firm specializing in corporate espionage. I met Kyle in a dusty, anonymous office that smelled of old books and ozone. He was a small, unassuming man with eyes that missed nothing. I told him everything: the family betrayal, the auction, Sterling's plan. I didn't sugarcoat any of it. When I was finished, he was silent for a long moment. "This Sterling," he said, "he is very wealthy, but he is also very arrogant. He believes he is the only player on the board. This is a mistake we can use." I slid a cashier's check for $150,000 across the desk. "I need two things. First, I need everything you can find on Sterling: his finances, his enemies, his skeletons. He has a plan to ruin Mark using his past crimes. I want a plan to ruin Sterling using his. Second, I need a team, a hacker, the best." Kyle looked at the check, then back at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "For this amount, I can get you nicks. Not a person, a collective. They are ghosts. They live on the dark web and take offense to men like Sterling who think they own the world." While Kyle and Nix started digging into Sterling's hidden empire, I began my own performance. I went back to my family with my head bowed in shame. I told them the story Sterling had invented. The billionaire bidder was cruel, mocked me, and left without completing the deal. The auction was a failure. The pain in my mother's eyes was like a physical blow, but I held my ground. Guilt is a fire, and I let it forge my resolve. Then came the hardest part. I went to Mark. I played the role of a lifetime. I was the prodigal niece, broken and contrite. I wept. I begged. I told him I was desperate, that I would do anything, take any job just to help my family. It worked exactly as Sterling predicted. Mark's ego, it turned out, was the size of a small planet, and he gobbled up my humiliation with relish. He saw my tears as his triumph. He gave me a job as his assistant, an overpaid gopher, tasked with fetching coffee and sorting mail. It was a position designed to humiliate me daily, and it was the perfect cover. For weeks, I was the model employee, quiet, efficient, invisible. I endured Mark's condescending remarks and the pitying looks from former colleagues. All the while, I was mapping the office's network, observing security, and pinpointing his central server. The necklace from Sterling was a listening device, and I used it to my own advantage, recording every smug, incriminating conversation Mark had. Nix, through Kyle, gave me the tools.
They confirmed the skimmer files were on an air-gapped server in Mark's office, accessible only from his personal terminal. Almost impossible to get to. Almost. At the same time, Kyl's research on Sterling bore fruit. He was far dirtier than I could have imagined. His fortune was built on market manipulation, tax evasion, and a particularly nasty habit of funding illicit arms deals through charitable foundations. A monster hiding in plain sight. Nix dove into his offshore accounts, following the digital breadcrumbs. The plan crystallized. This wasn't just about destroying Mark anymore. It was about orchestrating a symphony of destruction, and I would be the conductor. Using the spyware Sterling had given me, I didn't just plant it, I had Nix modify it. When I finally got a moment alone in Mark's office late one night, I installed a far more powerful program. It did two things. First, it copied the entire skimmer files. Second, it created a hidden back door that could be triggered remotely. I sent the skimmer files to Kyl. We had everything on Mark. A few days later, Nix sent word. They were in. They had irrefutable proof of Sterling's illegal arms dealing, complete with bank transfers and shipping manifests. Now I had the ammunition to destroy both men. All I needed was the right stage, and I knew exactly where it would be. Mark was hosting a massive charity gala to celebrate the revitalization of Vance Construction, a PR stunt to cement his image as a civic hero. Mr. Sterling would be there as the guest of honor, the two of them on a stage together, celebrating their victory. It was poetry, the perfect final scene. I contacted Sterling on the burner phone. "I have it," I said, my voice trembling with fake anxiety. "I know how to get the files, but I can only do it during the gala when everyone's distracted. I can trigger the transfer then." Sterling's voice was smug. "Excellent. Do it. My team will be waiting. Your part in this is almost over, little girl." "Oh, I know," I whispered after hanging up. "It certainly is." The climax. The night of the gala was electric, a sea of champagne, diamonds, and fake smiles. The city's elite turned out to pay homage to Mark. I moved through the crowd in a simple dress, my heart a steady, cold drum. I saw Mr. Sterling near the stage, schmoozing with the mayor. He gave me a subtle nod, his eyes gleaming. He really thought this was his moment. I slipped into the control room overlooking the main stage, telling the tech I needed to load a special presentation. My name still carried enough weight that he didn't question it. He gave me access to the console controlling the massive screens behind the stage. I inserted a USB drive. It wasn't a presentation. It was a key, prepared by Nix. I returned to the ballroom just as Mark took the stage, bathing in the spotlight. He launched into a sickening speech about legacy, vision, and progress. Then he thanked his partner and mentor, the brilliant philanthropist Mr. Sterling, and invited him on stage. The two of them stood side by side, shaking hands for the cameras, two apex predators celebrating their kill. This was the moment. I pulled out my own phone and sent a single text to Kyl. Curtain up. Two things happened at once. On the giant screens behind them, the corporate logos were suddenly replaced by a ledger, lines and lines of numbers under a heading that read, "The Skimmer." A collective gasp went through the audience. Nix displayed the most damning transactions, the slow siphoning from Vance Construction, the final transfer that bankrupted us. Mark's face went white as a sheet. His smile froze, then collapsed into pure horror. At the exact same moment, every phone in the room buzzed with a news alert. Kyl had timed the leak perfectly. An international news consortium had just published a massive exposé. The headline, "Billionaire Philanthropist Alistair Sterling Linked to International Arms Ring." Sterling, who had been enjoying Mark's public meltdown, glanced at his own phone. The blood drained from his face. His mask of cold control shattered, replaced with primal fury. He turned and stared directly at me, right where I stood at the edge of the crowd. He knew. The screens changed again. The skimmer files were replaced with shipping manifests for illegal weapons, photos of Sterling meeting with known warlords, and charts of his money-laundering empire. The same people who were just applauding these men were now staring at them like they were monsters, which, of course, they were. Pandemonium. People were shouting, pointing. The media swarmed the stage like sharks that smelled blood. Mark was babbling denials, pointing a shaking finger at Sterling. Sterling, for his part, went eerily calm. His gaze locked on me, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the look of a king who had just been checkmated by a pawn. Federal agents, tipped off by Kyle, entered the ballroom. One group went for Mark, who basically crumpled into their custody. Another group approached Sterling. He didn't resist. He just straightened his tie, gave me one last lingering look, and allowed them to lead him away. I watched them go, the two architects of my family's pain, their empires incinerated in 5 minutes. I didn't feel joy, just a profound, quiet sense of justice. The noise of the room faded to a dull murmur. It was over. They say the fall of powerful men is a dramatic, sudden event, but it's not. It's the result of countless small choices, of our arrogance, and of underestimating the people you step on. My story is proof of that. So many of you have shared your own stories of betrayal and fighting for justice, and I want you to know I read every single one. If you believe that fighting for what's right is always worth it, no matter the cost, then hit that like button and subscribe. And in the comments below, tell me, what does justice mean to you? Now, let me tell you what happened next. In the aftermath, Kyle and Nix worked their magic quietly. The full skimmer files went to the DA, leading to a swift conviction for Mark. All of the stolen assets were frozen. The evidence against Sterling was so overwhelming he was denied bail, facing enough federal charges to keep him in prison for life. The legal battle to reclaim Vance Construction was tough, but with the evidence I had, the outcome was never in doubt. The company was returned to my family, but it was a hollow victory. The business was buried in debt, its reputation tainted. But I wasn't the